But just a short little bit, again, talking about some science and classification and some interesting bits, as well as what we've been doing over the last little while. And you should be able to see on the screen there some of our volunteers working in the museum. We're finally at the point in the UK Museum where we are getting the upstairs area ready and set out so that it is self-guiding as people go round. And you can see we're working on, the volunteers there are working on a brand new living fossils display, which will be the first ever thing that you see as you come into the museum, because we're going to start downstairs with Lyell and Darwin. You know, the man who rewrote the story of the rocks and the man who rewrote the story of life. And as you come up the stairs, you'll be presented with a display on living fossils, which obviously challenge both of those. The story of the rocks, because they are, of course, rocks and they have no evidence of deep time or evolution in them at all. As you go around, you'll then start to get onto the dinosaur area, which you can see we're starting to set up there with the great big dinosaur on the wall and all the bones and stuff in the display case, which is all very exciting, including this particular bone. If my slide will actually work. Is that working, Sam?
Yeah, that's all good.
Good stuff. Okay, here's a bone which I was working on today. This isn't actually a dinosaur bone, although we have done the same thing to some dinosaur bones. This is a crocodilian bone. It's a crocodilian bone from a place called Orton Pit, which is in Peterborough in the east of the UK. And, well, it's an ancient crocodile bone from the Jurassic rocks there, and it's supposed to be around 200 million years old, or really 199 million years old, give or minus 3 million years. So somewhere around the 200 million year old mark. Now, what I've been doing today is drilling a big hole in it. And the reason I've been doing that is to collect all of the powder, because that powder will then become part of the sample set, which we will test in the next couple of weeks, not only for things like collagen. This has already shown up positive for there being organics inside of it, using a process called FTIR, Fourier Transform Infrared Spectroscopy, if you want to know the full name of the equipment. But we will also be doing some testing for collagen and then some proteomic analysis. In other words, actually analyzing the proteins inside of it. Now, we're going to do this with two other samples as well. One large iguanodon vertebrae that we dug up from the Isle of Wight a few years back, and also a big Apatosaurus rib bone, which I brought back from the US on my last trip. But the crocodile one here is particularly exciting for me because, well, you see, we're going to go ahead with proteomic research, analysis, right? In other words, if we can come back with it being analyzed as being shown to be a crocodilian protein inside, or even a reptilian protein inside would be good enough for me, but especially crocodilian, the real challenge then is, or the real thing that it shows, is that the chances of this protein being contamination, which is obviously one of the big challenges and the big criticisms that we get in this research, the chances of it being contamination is very slim, because the chances of a crocodile contaminating this bone in Peterborough in England is fairly low. And so it's very sort of exciting research that we're getting into at the moment. So do pray for this over the next few couple of weeks, really, as we do this. But it just sort of, again, goes to show how vital the museum ministry is, as well as the research and being able to hold these fossils and do the research in on it. On my birthday as well, I found a brand new fossil site. This is actually in Shrewsbury Museum. They have a new geology of Shropshire area, which I'd not seen before. And we found about a brand new place, which is only about 20 minutes away from where I live, where these large polystrate trees have been found. And I've managed to track them down on the geology map. And so very soon we're going to go and see if we can find where these are being held and where they were originally found, and see, of course, if we can find any more. So I think a bit of a road trip is in order fairly soon. But again, polystrate trees, we've made the point of these before, right? They cut up through many, many layers. You can see the huge tree there and the bark is still there. We found these kind of things in the US as well. So all very exciting. All right, brief little bit. I want to talk about classification and science and the science of creation and all that kind of stuff. And we start with a program which we've done several times before. Who said this? Beware of false science, it leads you astray. That's the sort of paraphrase, right? But it's actually in the Bible. It's in, well, let's see if you can guess where it is if we put up the actual Bible verse. Timothy, keep that which is committed to your trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called, which some professing have erred according to the faith. This is in your old King James Bible because, yes, this is in 1 Timothy 6 verse 20, and the paraphrase that Paul is telling Timothy is beware of false science, it will lead you astray. And yes, the old King James does use that word science. It's the old word for knowledge. Science and knowledge mean the same thing. Beware of false science, beware of false knowledge. It will lead you astray. The point? False knowledge will lead you away from Christ. True knowledge will point you towards Christ. So make sure you have some true knowledge. Okay, the world's first scientific classification, an journal article, a paper published in Nature, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, if not the most prestigious scientific journal, a few years back, talked about the world's first scientific classification. This is what they had to say. The earliest case of systematic naming occurred about 6,000 years ago when God brought all his newly fashioned creatures to Adam to see what he would call them. Genesis chapter 2, verse 19. You see, people do accept this sometimes, and you know the story of God sending the animals to Adam to name them. It was one of the first roles that Adam had to do, was actually classify their things, followed shortly by naming his wife and then tending the garden. Okay, even Nature are admitting that the earliest case of naming, systematic naming, was Adam when he had to name the animals. Okay, well, let's see if we can get a little bit more scientific with it then. Who invented the modern concept of genus and species? If you know your modern classification system, the modern taxonomic system, it's got a binomial system, binomial nomenclature it's called. It's a two-naming system. We have genus and species. Genus being like, for instance, put it into our kind of classification, Homo, species being sapien, put it into the dog, right? Canis is the genus, Lupus is the species. It's a two-naming system. All right. Well, who actually invented this system? The answer, Carl von Linn, or Carl Linnaeus, as he's often known. There he is there. Set it up a few years ago, and how did he actually come to this conclusion or this classification system of actually naming things according to genus and species? Well, the answer is in Genesis 1:11. You see, in Genesis 1:11, it says, God commanded the earth to bring forth plants, each after their own kind. You see, in your English Bible, that word kind there is found, but in the old Hebrew, it's min. And you see, this word in English is kind, this word in Hebrew is min. But if you go to your Latin Vulgate Bible and you have a look, can you see there's verse 11, and it's all in Latin, right? I wonder how many of our viewers today can read Latin, but have a look at what it says there. You see what's highlighted in red? Genus. You see, this word genus is what the Hebrew word min is, and what in English is kind. And in fact, you can actually go to the Septuagint, which is a Greek, and you can see the same word there, genus. You see, in Genesis 1, chapter 11, the English word is kind, the Hebrew word is min, but the Greek and the Latin name is genus. Okay, so what is a kind? Well, the word kind is from the Old English kin, as in related to each other, but not related to a non-kin or separate group, for instance, mankind, king's men, or indeed Dawkins. It's all from the same root word. You see, if you want a biblical sense, bird kind was originally created separately and unrelated to the fish kind or any other kind, but according to the theory of evolution, birds are related to all things, and particularly from the reptiles from which they supposedly evolved from. Right, you know, dinosaurs to birds? Interesting. Okay, well, here's your origin of bears according to the theory of evolution. A fish all by itself grew legs and evolved into an amphibian, which given enough time evolved scales and ended up as a reptile, which given enough time evolved into a mammal-like reptile called a snapsid, which eventually evolved into an actual mammal, which you can see there, which eventually evolved into the common ancestor of all bears. And from there you get polar bears, black bears, and brown bears, and so on and so forth. You see, according to the Bible, God created things according to their kind. And so there was one original bear kind, and from that kind, you end up with all the diversity that we see today. Variation within a kind. I mean, if you want to put it in a biblical perspective, God says that he made Adam and Eve, and from Adam and Eve, all people are descended. All the human races, all the different cultures, all the different ethnicities, all the different skin colors, all the different eye shades, they're all from Adam. In fact, they all go back to Noah. In fact, it specifically says in after the flood that it's from Noah's 3 sons that all nations and tribes and races have actually descended from. And is there any is there any scientific backing to this biblical picture? Because I hope you realize that one of these, well, let's go back actually to our bear here. You realize that only one half of this picture has actually been observed. We've never seen a fish turn into an amphibian, or an amphibian turn into a reptile, or a reptile turn into a mammal, or even one type of mammal even turn into a bear. We have, however, seen lots of examples of variation within its kind. So Nature, again, prestigious journal, a few years back, bacteria kind. You see, here's a load of pictures of bacteria. But these bacteria are rather interesting because you see these bacteria are actually fossil bacteria. These microfossils, these bacteria fossils, were found in a 3,235 million year old. I mean, that's like nearly over 3 billion years old. In fact, there's the fossil bacteria, there's the modern one. You see, there's no doubt about it, these bacteria have continued to reproduce after their own kind, and even after 3 billion supposed years, they're still filamentaceous bacteria. You see, Stephen Jay Gould, who was an evolutionist, but a very honest one, actually said our ability to classify both living and fossil species distinctly and using the same criteria fits splendidly with creationist tenets. It really does. And you see, our aim is to show that there are plenty of opinions and theories that disagree with the Bible, but the facts never actually do. And just to finish off the point very quickly, Carl Linnaeus, when he actually lifted this classification system straight out of Scripture, it was simply because he was reading his Latin Bible. You see, he believed that God had created the world, and he also believed that God had created the world with living things that had been created according to their kind. And so he simply said, well, if that's the case, I'm going to base my entire classification system around this idea of a created kind. Of course, in the Latin Vulgate Bible, the Bible that Carl Linnaeus was reading, that word was genus. So you take genus out and put it into your classification system at the core of your classification system, because according to Carl Linnaeus, everything above that was just his way of organizing it on paper, right? You know, kingdom, phylum, order, class, family. Well, now you see, you have it centered around this idea of genus and species, and Carl Linnaeus recognized that God had created things according to their kind, so he centers it around genus, which is the old Latin word for kind, which is then in our English translations as kind, but he recognized that within a kind you do certainly get variation. You get special types of that kind, and that's where we get our word species from. It's from the same root word as the word special. It's a special type within that kind, and so there you have it. A classification system based around a biblical principle, which is still in effect today. And yes, our point is to show that there are many ideas, hypotheses, opinions, and theories that disagree with every single part of the Bible, but the facts never actually do. And if you do what Carl Linnaeus did, and you actually start with a biblical perspective, things begin to fit in much, much nicer.